When a biased cop makes what he believes is just another routine arrest based purely on prejudice, he rarely expects anything to disrupt his perception of control. But what happens when the person he tried to humiliate stands as a powerful symbol of justice? How will that moment of confrontation completely turn his world upside down and force him to confront his own beliefs? Before we dive into this gripping story of redemption and justice, take a moment to tell us where you're watching from in the comments below, and make sure to subscribe so you don't miss more thrilling tales that challenge the very foundation of the status quo. You think you're untouchable just because you drive a fancy car? Officer Ben Carter's words cut the air with sharp authority, his voice like a blade slicing through the tension. Elise Bryant, unfazed, kept her hands firmly on the steering wheel, her expression unreadable as she watched his face harden. A faint, almost imperceptible smirk lingered on the corner of his lips, one that spoke of superiority and something far darker beneath. "License and registration," he barked, though Elise had already handed them over minutes ago. Ben flipped through the documents in his hand, his fingers almost feverishly searching for something, anything, that could justify the narrative he'd already formed in his mind. "Is there a problem, officers?" Elise's voice was calm, unnervingly controlled. Too controlled, Ben thought, and it irritated him. Most people he stopped, especially people like her, had that blend of fear and desperation in their voices, the sound of submission. But not her. No, this woman wasn't playing along with the script he'd written in his mind. "You're driving a car worth more than most people's houses. That's problem enough." Ben snapped back, folding his arms, his eyes narrowing with judgment. "Step out of the vehicle." Elise didn't move right away. Instead, she fixed him with a steady, unflinching gaze, locking eyes with him. "May I ask why?" she asked, her voice even, not even a hint of panic. "I've complied with your requests. My license is valid. The car is registered in my name. What exactly am I being detained for?" Ben felt a sudden surge of frustration rising in his chest. This wasn't supposed to happen. He wasn't used to being questioned like this, especially not by someone like her. The tailored outfit, the confident posture, everything about her made him uncomfortable. He couldn't stand it. "Don't make this harder than it has to be," he snapped, trying to force her into submission. Still, she didn't budge. "Am I under arrest?" she pressed, tilting her head slightly. Her tone wasn't confrontational, but it wasn't submissive either. She spoke as if she knew exactly what she was doing, calm, measured, in control. Ben clenched his jaw. Yes, you are." He reached for the door handle, pulling it open before she could object. With a swift motion, he yanked it open, stepping back to allow her to exit. Elise stepped out, her movements deliberate and unhurried. Her eyes never left his as she stood taller than he expected, her heels giving her an added height that made her seem almost statuesque. For a moment, she glanced briefly at the dashcam on his patrol car, then returned her gaze to him. "This is a mistake," she said simply, her voice holding no fear, no panic. Ben ignored her words, his mind too focused on the act of control. "Turn around." "Hands behind your back," he ordered, pulling out his handcuffs with a quiet sense of satisfaction, ready to snap them around her wrists. Elise complied, her posture unwavering. The cold steel closed around her wrists, but she didn't flinch, not even slightly. "You don't know who I am, do you?" she said softly as he led her toward the patrol car. "Does it matter?" Ben scoffed, pushing her into the back seat. He slammed the door shut, then leaned against the car for a moment, exhaling sharply. This wasn't supposed to bother him, but something about her words lingered, gnawing at him. At the station, Elise sat calmly in the holding cell, her hands resting peacefully in her lap. The fluorescent lights above buzzed faintly, and the air carried the faint scent of stale coffee. Ben stood across the room, watching her through the glass, a mixture of irritation and confusion bubbling inside him. He didn't like how composed she seemed. People weren't supposed to look like that after being cuffed and dragged in. They were supposed to look defeated, rattled. But Elise Bryant? She sat there like she was waiting for a delayed flight at the airport.
Calm.
Unfazed. Who is she? Ben muttered to himself as he walked back to his desk. He flipped through her file again. Elise Bryant, no criminal record, a spotless driving history. A quick look at her address revealed a home in an affluent neighborhood. Ben frowned, the first hint of doubt creeping into his mind. Ben, his partner, Officer Ramirez, called from across the room. "You sure about this one?" I ran her plates. Everything checks out. This might not look great. Ben bristled, defensive. She was being uncooperative. Ramirez raised an eyebrow. Uncooperative? She looks like she's running for office. Maybe you should let her lawyer handle this before it blows up in your face. Ben waved him off, his ego bristling. "I've got it under control." But as he sat back down, Elise's words echoed in his mind, repeating like a nagging whisper. "You don't know who I am." The next morning, Ben walked into court, still convinced he had handled the situation by the book, but a growing sense of doubt gnawed at him. He had no idea how much this one case would change everything. Ben walked into the courtroom with confidence, expecting a quick and routine hearing. Elise would plead guilty, pay a fine, and that would be the end of it. He had it all figured out. But as soon as he stepped through the double doors, something felt off. The room was buzzing with hushed murmurs, and people were whispering, glancing his way. His stomach tightened with unease. At the front of the room, Elise stood, no longer in the simple outfit she had worn the day before. Instead, she was dressed in a sharp navy suit, her hair neatly pulled back. She didn't look like a defendant. She looked like someone who owned the space, someone who commanded attention. "What the hell?" Ben muttered under his breath. "Your Honor," Elise's voice rang out with precision and authority, silencing the room. "Before we proceed, I'd like to state for the record that I am a federal prosecutor, and I will be representing myself in this matter." Ben froze. The room seemed to suck all the air out as the full weight of her words hit him. The judge raised an eyebrow, clearly taken aback by this unexpected twist. "Mrs. Bryant, this is highly irregular," the judge said, his voice tinged with surprise. Elise smiled faintly, but there was no warmth in it. "Yes, Your Honor, but given the circumstances surrounding my arrest, I feel it is necessary to personally address these allegations and the officer involved." Ben's heart pounded in his chest as the full realization set in. This wasn't going to be routine. This was going to be a nightmare. Elise turned slightly, her eyes meeting Ben's across the room for the first time since their confrontation. In that moment, Ben saw something flicker in her gaze, something cold, purposeful. It wasn't anger, it wasn't smugness, it was something far more dangerous. "You've made a big mistake, Officer Carter," she said, her voice steady and unwavering. "And today we're going to talk about it." The courtroom fell into stunned silence, every eye on Ben as the weight of her words settled over him like a storm cloud. Elise Bryant stood tall, her commanding voice resonating through the room, and for the first time, Ben felt his confidence crack. "Your Honor," Elise began, her tone unwavering, "I intend not only to argue my innocence, but also to address a pattern of abuse within law enforcement that this officer's actions represent. I request that this case be given the attention and weight it deserves." The murmurs in the courtroom grew louder, a sense of unease hanging in the air. Officer Ben Carter, seated at the defendant's table, sat frozen. His usual confidence was evaporating. The room felt smaller, the walls closing in on him. This wasn't supposed to happen. People like Elise, calm, composed, professional, didn't belong in a holding cell. And they certainly didn't end up dismantling his actions in front of a judge. "Mrs. Bryant, I'll allow you to proceed," the judge said, his tone a mix of curiosity and caution. "But I expect your arguments to remain relevant to the charges at hand." Elise nodded, turning back to the gallery, where the room was packed with journalists, local activists, and an increasing number of curious onlookers who had caught wind of the unusual proceedings. Elise's presence commanded the space. Ben could feel the weight of judgment in every eye that landed on him. Elise began her case with the poise of someone who had lived in courtrooms for years. She detailed her arrest with a level of precision that made each word land like a hammer. "I was stopped with no clear reason provided," Elise said, her eyes briefly flicking toward Ben. Despite presenting valid identification and cooperating fully, I was accused of resisting authority, a charge that's often used as a catch-all when no real crime has been committed. Her words stung, but it was what came next that sent a chill through Ben. This isn't an isolated incident. This is a systemic issue. Ben shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Every word felt like a dart aimed directly at his chest. He wanted to defend himself, but his attorney had warned him to stay quiet. Speaking out now would only make things worse. Elise walked toward the jury box, her heels clicking softly against the polished floor. "Your Honor," she continued, "I have years of experience prosecuting cases like this. I've seen how power can be abused, and I fought against it. But yesterday, I became the target of that abuse. And today, I stand here not just for myself, but for everyone who's ever been on the receiving end of unwarranted profiling." Her words landed heavily. For the first time, Ben felt something other than frustration or anger. It was a gnawing sensation in his chest, something dangerously close to guilt. As Elise presented her evidence, she displayed a quiet ruthlessness. She called on witnesses, people who had been present during Ben's previous cases. One after another, they recounted incidents where Ben had overstepped his authority, his actions fueled more by prejudice than by a sense of justice. A young black man in his 20s took the stand. "Officer Carter pulled me over last year," he said, his voice steady but tinged with pain. "He said my taillight was broken,